The first question that I've been asking people in this series is actually, who was Laura Perls to you in your experience of her?
Wisdom, founder and history, a human being, first of all, a dancer, and someone who inspired me. And probably really an most influential part for me in my own development and work.
Okay. And when you say she influenced or inspired you, can you say more about what that means for you?
Yes, it certainly can. Like what it means is, like that I always, and I only really realize that now in my older age, like how much she influenced me in how to work in a relational sense and how to work with not an agenda of any method. She always said experiment is only a very tiny little part of Gestalt therapy. Like in that way of how we are, and her interest in particular, and I think that is something I have in myself, her interest in humanity and human beings. And when I listened to these tapes the other day, where she really said, someone asked her about if she was a little disappointed that her name was so much in the background and Fritz's name was so much in the foreground. And her answer was, and it's very interesting, she said she never was really interested in writing. Her interest really lied in humanity and human beings, in her relationship with that. So in that sense, like I think that influenced a lot in my work, She also had an interested comment was, well, Gestalt therapy is not something you can really put into, at least that's how I understood it, well, how I took it, into an educational system. Because as soon as you put it into a fixed system, you create a fixed Gestalt. She experienced, like in New York, where they had an experimental laboratory where they, really with each other experimented and set and be relational in their relationship with clients.
Yeah, I didn't realize that was a proposal of hers, but I think that's really interesting, like the emergent instead of the programmed, systematized learning.
Yes.
Huh. Okay. I mean, as I told you, part of this project came out of a request for some storytelling. So yes. I wonder, and even the tapes that you were listening to or from the experiences that you had, what moments do you remember about your time with Laura?
Beautiful. A very personal moment, I remember that I was in my early 30s and she was 80. And in a piece of work she did with me personally, that I hit that point where I couldn't believe her flexibility in her total presence in her body. Compared to me as a 30-year-old, I felt like a clumsy big elephant, while she was this, in a way, tiny little, but very agile ballerina. So, like this moment really sticks often in my head, where she lied on the floor with me and did some body work. she was very interested in posture and in, how we hold ourselves within the world. She always said there is a parallel. How we hold ourselves within the world is how our posture is and how we walk through life. So she often asked people to walk. That is probably another thing. Also her shyness. Every lunchtime or breaks, often in the breaks, she just sat on the piano and played music. She didn't need, that is probably something which I really have in my memory to her music, her playing piano to us. And she could be very much fun, very humorous. The groups were never boring. They were very humorous, lots of laughing, lots and lots of laughing.
I'm curious, can you say more about her humor? I've heard a bit about her temper. I've heard a little bit about sometimes some impatience, but I haven't heard much about her humor.
Ah, interesting. Her humor was quite, not an outrageous humor, but, like how she could sometimes point out things in her sharpness within groups. Yeah, if someone brought, like I have a drama or I have I have this, and, Royce ring, and how she repeated that in a way. So actually the awareness came, it became more and more figural until, the awareness within you arose so clearly that, like there, and humorous, like in a light way. So at that point where you could make a choice. But the choice came from you in her. So that certainly, otherwise, just her lightness within the group, playing around with body work as well as, like explaining to us. We didn't have that many groups with her because, she was in her 80s. And I think she died when she was 83 or 4. So we used, because we were an established group, we had the privilege to use, like our field to get as much information as we wanted. It wasn't about group process that much, we didn't interact. It was really our sitting in an incredibly deep space of curiosity to find out about her history.
And what did you find out about her history?
Like what she was one of the first women, or if not the first woman in Frankfurt to study at the university. And this was a very exciting times in the 30s. And that was where she got engaged, in Gestalt psychology first, and she started off like with Fritz with psychoanalytical engagement. She did her analysis. And the other day I heard, again, it was really interesting for me. She said, like, you learn the most out of doing therapy, not out of your own process in, doing an analytical process. Sentence like this, wow, comes, yeah. When she said she learned the most engaging actually and having that contact with her clients, and I had a lot of, history with her husband and how that, I never, in my engagement with her, I never experienced much bitterness about her. She just said, yeah, that's what it was. Fritz needed a totally different way. And even in their separation, she very rarely spoke about her family life. So about her children, that was something we hardly heard. Yeah. But the pain, also how that occurred when they left Germany, they had to leave the parents behind. And that incredible experience took her years and years to come back to Germany to face the demon, you know, like, because she also felt guilty to have left and had survived the Holocaust, while all her family members got actually killed. So, you know, like, so as a German group, we certainly were very interested also in that component of their political stand, which came out of the 30s. And that Gestalt was a very socio-economic approach also, you know, a political approach, not a just individual approach, you know. So it was more, you know, like, how does whole situation and the whole field impact on the individual, and what is our contribution to the broader field?
Yeah, I've wondered, just because of those circumstances, I mean, the time and the generation that she was part of, it was sort of like the beginning of these global mass migrations. I mean, I know First World War, there were some of that. There's always been migration from war and from trauma and from disasters, but it seems for some reason like her having, or them having made that move and holding that sort of global identity, I've wondered if that is part of what has let Gestalt remain relevant. I mean, do you think it would have been different if she'd been static and just been German?
That's a good question. That's a very good question. I mean, and that is a good question because, you know, like, I mean, their move was first to Holland, and from Holland to South Africa, and from South Africa with apartheid then to America. It was not only that they were once immigrants, you know, they moved from place to place to place. So they were nomads in a way within the world system. And I'm sure that that had a huge influence on the development of, you know, Gestalt.
Do you think that, I mean, you said that she was not particularly interested in creating an educational system or a product or a book, but do you understand Laura as having dimensioned the impact and the transcendence of the work that they were creating?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I must say she had a huge impact, probably far more than ever really acknowledged. Yeah. And I can see that today in particular, you know, like where lots of people within the Gestalt community come back to that relational approach. You know, and also in a sense, at least here in Australia, I can watch, you know, like there was a lot of first Fritz approach within here. And when Maria and me, we moved from Germany here, I came, I think, 89 the first time. At 93, I immigrated to Australia. And we, you know, we brought our way of Gestalt into this country. It was a different movement, and there was also Zish and Claudia on the other side. I don't know if you probably have had contact with.
Yep.
You know, and Zish and Claudia certainly were also, you know, like far more in that relational realm, you know, like in their work sense and in their programming. And they always believed, and they actually stuck to it, which I really appreciate. You know, like they always believed that it is to press it into an educational system, it will lose its fluidity, and it will lose actually its essence as Gestalt, which is a non-fixed system. Yeah. So, and so here on the East Coast, it got closer and closer and more fixed, and then it exploded, you know, and now it's forming in a new way. We will see where we land with all of that. Yeah, but it got pushed into a master degree, and I can see how much it loses within that. you know, from its essence, and particular from Laura's influential way of thinking and being. You know, I really, that is probably, you know, I could really feel her being. I mean, I've never met Fritz, but I could feel really her being, you know, and I'm extremely thankful our teachers who always brought her into our field, you know. Jerry Krauss-Kogen and Wiltraud Krauss-Kogen, they were our teachers, you know, and they spent a lot of time. Don't know if you interviewed them. Yeah.
Well, Willie, yes. And Willie is, speaking with me about Jerry.
Yeah, that's right. You know, and Jerry and Willie were our teachers, you know, so yeah, I'm very thankful for that time. You know, I can see that it goes back there now. She gives me a big smile in the face.
So I am just curious if you have any particular Laura stories, like I said, just moments that have stayed with you either from time shared outside or within the workshops that you would like to tell.
You know, one moment I do probably remember really nice, where I was invited, I had the privilege, and I worked with Milan Strekovic. By then I was a co-trainer, how do you say, or at Willie and Jerry's Institute, you know, and I had a workshop with Milan, and we went back home, and Laura was staying there, and we put on, you know, and they had adopted a child from Brazil who was called Laura. And we put on the music and we danced all around the table, you know, and somehow this, you can say, craziness or playfulness, we all engaged with each other, you know, like to see her also in that, to have that privilege to see her in that, you know, like really lightness way, regardless of her history also, you know, that always fascinated me. You know, that yes, that is one thing which is probably stuck with me, that regardless of her seriously not easy history, I never could smell or feel or sense a bitterness. And her shyness, really her shyness. Her piano playing was just, you know, with 80, to be able to sit there and, you know, do her instrument and really looking after herself. Also, you know, lots of pauses when she could, I think that is something, her beauty lied also in allowing space of that the next thing could emerge. There was no hurry within groups. But, you know, like I also didn't spend days on days on days, you know, it was, yeah.
Yeah. So would you say that, I know I asked, but can you say a little bit more about how her teaching or her being have stayed with you in your work or in your way of being?
Yeah, I can see that these days today, you know, like, because I run groups, you know, a lot actually. And one thing I observe is her stand of how to work with resistance, not break through the resistance, rather meeting and make contact with that resistance. I think that is one of the most influential and fundamental influences I really took out of my, you know, learning with her, but also with Willie and Jerry, definitely. Or, you know, Jerry could sometimes be more pushy, more provocative, definitely in his approach. But, you know, Laura, to really how she very much met that person on that, but also allowed you to be independent and explore your own independence and adult being rather than, the child, how do you say, the child identification.
I'm wondering, and this, I hope this doesn't come out awkwardly. If not, please forgive me. I'm just wondering if you see any parallel in where you are now, as I believe a German immigrant Gestalt therapist in an English-speaking country as a Gestalt teacher, and how you met Laura in that same role.
It's actually never occurred to me really, but it's true. That there is probably a parallel there, yeah, in a different way, very different way. Was my own choice, wasn't for her. But certainly, I mean, one thing probably, like was when I immigrated here, Gestalt was not very big. Even at that time, it was very, just started. It was probably Sich and Claudia. And then we started, the Gestalt Association, GANS, here in Australia. And that took, there was a bunch of us, who met in Melbourne and started that process to actually let it grow and let it grow. I am curious where it goes because, certain things fall apart and others are now emerging in a way in that sense. Yeah. So, if you say, if I see myself in a parallel, I see myself certainly that I am a pioneer here in my total own approach, and that I think I do a combination of other, like I really developed my own being and my own style, and she was very influential. So were other teachers on the way, definitely. Marianne Frey was a very big influence for me. And so the freedom of being as an immigrant in a country, and I am living in a countryside, I can do what I want. Yeah. So in a way I could explore and I can, really develop my very individual own style.
Well, I think that is freeing as an immigrant. I'm an immigrant to Mexico. You have to reinvent yourself anyhow.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that is certainly something she probably did several times in her life. Yeah, I find it also interesting that, like I just realized that the other day, and I realized, she went back home to die. She went back to Pforzheim. And that I contemplated. Mind you, I'm born in Colombia, so I'm a double immigrant. So yeah, but like in a way, yeah, there is a parallel. It's true. Never really occurred to me. There was one when you asked about stories. She always told this story about this client she had, and that is for me a clear picture of her incredible ability to have patience and to hold space and to just be. And there was this, I don't know if you heard that story of that client who came in and sat at the door for an hour and didn't say a thing. The door was not closed and didn't want to actually close the door. And she was thinking, oh, and she asked, and the client even didn't respond much, so she sat down and just sat. The hour was finished and this woman left. And she thought, oh, she will never come back. That will be it. Next week, same time, this woman came and sat at the door and waited and sat there another hour, and the hour went. And by the third time, this woman moved a little bit more in the room. And a little bit further down, the door was closed, and then she started her process. And that she just allowed that movement of the client to come towards her rather than her coming towards the client. I think that is, quite pivotal.
Okay. So would it be okay for you if we stop this part here?
Absolutely.